I came home expecting a quiet evening by the lake, and instead I found my dock half cut in the water like something had tried to tear it apart and just walked away halfway through. And the craziest part wasn't the damage. It was who ordered it, not the county, not a court, not even law enforcement. It was a woman from my HOA who decided she didn't like how it looked. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a dock anymore. It was about someone thinking they could take control of something that was never theirs to begin with. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for fights. I moved out to that lake for the exact opposite reason. Quiet mornings, coffee on the deck, maybe a fishing line in the water before work. The place had this calm to it that you just don't get in the city anymore. And for over a decade, that dock had been part of that life. I bought the property 12 years ago, back when the neighborhood was still filling in, planned waterfront community, neat rows of houses, shared marina access, all that HOA stuff. You know the type. Rules about paint colors, mailbox sizes, what kind of grass you can have. But honestly, it never bothered me much. Everyone mostly minded their own business. The dock itself had been there since year one. Built with a county permit, fully inspected, signed off twice. I kept every piece of paperwork in a folder in my office because that's just how I am. My dad drilled that into me growing up. If it's yours, make sure you can prove it, so I did. For 11 years, not a single complaint. Neighbors used to wave when I'd be out there. Sometimes kids would fish off the side. One of my neighbors, Carl, used to joke that my dock was the unofficial hangout spot because it stuck out just a little further than the others, not by much, but enough to get a better view of the sunset. And honestly, I like that. Then came Lauren. Lauren Whitaker moved into the neighborhood about a year before everything went sideways. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, always dressed like she was about to walk into a board meeting, even on a Saturday morning. She wasn't loud, but she had this way of talking that made it clear she expected people to listen. At first, she was just another neighbor, polite nods, quick hellos, but it didn't take long before she started getting involved in the HOA committees, meetings, that whole world, and eventually she became the head of the Architectural Review Committee, which, if you've ever lived in an HOA, you know that's where things can start to get interesting. It started small, little notices going around about community consistency, suggestions about landscaping, reminders about dock maintenance, things like that. Nothing too serious, until one afternoon I got a letter in the mail with my name on it, and that familiar HOA letterhead. I remember standing in my kitchen reading it, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. According to the notice, my dock was in violation. They claimed it extended 2 feet beyond the approved community waterline boundary. 2 feet. I actually laughed when I read that the first time, not because it was funny, but because it made no sense. I'd seen the plans, I knew exactly where that boundary was. So I did what I always do. I went to my office, pulled out the folder, and laid everything out on the desk. The original county permit, the inspection reports, the site drawings, and then I went online and pulled up the HOA's own plat map. I spent maybe an hour comparing everything, measuring, double-checking. And by the time I was done, I was more confused than anything else, because the numbers lined up perfectly. The dock wasn't over anything. It was exactly where it was supposed to be. That's when I figured this was just a misunderstanding, something that would clear up as soon as someone actually looked at the documents. So I wrote a letter, not angry, not defensive, just straightforward. I attached copies of the permit, highlighted the relevant sections, included the plat map, and I sent it certified so there'd be a record of it. In the letter, I said something along the lines of, "Hey, I think there's been a mix-up here. Could you please review these documents before taking any further action?" Simple, reasonable. 3 days later, I got a response. It wasn't from the HOA board, it was directly from Lauren. And the tone, it was different. She thanked me for my submission. That was the word she used, submission. And then she went on to explain that the HOA's community standards superseded any county-level permitting, that maintaining a uniform shoreline appearance was a priority, and that I had 30 days to bring my dock into compliance. No mention of the documents I sent, no acknowledgement of the measurements, just a decision that had already been made. I read that letter twice, then a third time, trying to figure out if I missed something. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, this isn't a misunderstanding. This is someone deciding they don't like something, and then finding a way to justify changing it. I could have fired back right then, called her, argued, escalated, but something about the way that letter was written told me that wouldn't go anywhere. So instead, I did something else. I made a copy of everything, every letter, every document, every email, and I sent it all to a real estate attorney a friend of mine had recommended years ago. A guy named Daniel Brooks, calm, methodical, the kind of person who doesn't say much unless it matters. I didn't even ask him to do anything right away. I just said, "Take a look at this, tell me if I'm missing something." Then I waited, because at that point, I had a feeling this wasn't going to stay a paperwork issue for very long. And I was right. 2 weeks later, I pulled into my driveway after work, and that's when everything changed. I remember killing the engine and just sitting there for a second. Something fell off before I even stepped out of the truck. Maybe it was the way the water looked, or maybe it was just instinct. But when I walked around the side of the house and got a clear view of the shoreline, my stomach dropped. At first it didn't register, like my brain needed a second to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The dock wasn't gone, but it wasn't right either. It was sagging, tilted, one side dipping low enough that the boards were almost touching the water. And then I saw the cuts. 2 of the main support posts, cleanly sliced through. Not weather damage, not rot, fresh cuts, deliberate. There was still a guy out there, standing on what was left of the platform, packing up tools like he was just finishing a normal job. I didn't even think. I just walked straight down toward him. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" He looked up, startled, like he didn't expect anyone to come home yet. I'm just doing the work I was hired for," he said, kind of defensive, kind of confused. "Hired by who?" He hesitated for half a second, and that was all I needed to know. This wasn't going to be a simple answer. "The HOA," he said finally. "Ms. Whitaker authorized it." Of course she did. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady, because right then, everything in me wanted to lose it. "You have any paperwork?" I asked. He shook his head. "I was told it was approved. I just follow the work order." I nodded, not at him, really, more to myself, because this wasn't on him. He was just a guy doing a job. "All right," I said, pulling my phone out. "I need you to stop. Right now. No more cutting, no more touching anything until this gets sorted out." He looked unsure, but something in my tone must have landed, because he set the tool down and stepped back. "Look, man, I don't want trouble," he said. "Neither do I," I replied. "That's why we're stopping right here." I took a few photos, the cuts, the angle of the dock, the equipment. Then I stepped back and just looked at it for a second. 11 years, and in a couple hours someone had turned it into something barely holding together. That night, I barely slept, not because of the dock itself, but because of what it meant. She didn't just send letters, she didn't wait for any kind of legal process. She sent someone onto my property and had them start tearing down a structure she had no authority over. That's not enforcement, that's trespassing. First thing the next morning, I called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said, calm as ever. "They cut into it," I told him. 2 support posts, it's sagging into the water. There was a pause on the line. Not long, just enough. "Did you document everything?" "Photos, yes. Contractor's still here. Says he was hired by the HOA. "Good," he said. "We're filing an emergency injunction today." And just like that, things shifted. By noon, Daniel had paperwork moving, legal filings, notices, everything lined up, and for the first time since this started, I felt like there was a line being drawn somewhere that actually mattered. But here's where it gets interesting, because while all that was happening, Daniel started digging into something I hadn't really thought much about before. The HOA's authority over the water itself. See, owning a lakefront property doesn't automatically mean you control everything past your shoreline. There are layers to it. County, state, sometimes even federal, depending on the waterway, and HOAs like to act like they have more control than they actually do. So Daniel started asking questions, pulling records, looking at permits, specifically, the one tied to the community marina. Now the marina was kind of the centerpiece of the neighborhood, shared boat slips, a small fuel dock, a couple of seating areas, board members used it all the time. It was one of those perks they like to point to when justifying HOA fees. And on paper, it all looked legitimate. There was a state waterway permit, filed years ago, approved active. But Daniel has this way of looking at things where he doesn't just read the document. He looks at what the document is based on. And that's where things started to crack. The permit, it wasn't based on current survey data. It referenced a boundary survey from 1989. Now, That might not sound like a big deal, but on a lake, boundaries aren't always static. Water lines shift, legal definitions get updated, and when they do, everything tied to those lines has to be reevaluated. So Daniel pulled the current survey data, overlaid it with the old one, and that's when he called me back. "You're going to want to hear this," he said. I was sitting in my truck when he told me, parked outside a hardware store because I couldn't focus on anything else that day. "According to the current legal water line," he said, "parts of their marina are no longer within the permitted boundary." I didn't say anything at first, just let that sink in. "You're telling me," I started. "I'm telling you," he cut in, still calm, "that the same people claiming your dock is out of bounds are operating structures that are actually out of bounds, under an outdated permit." And just like that, the whole thing flipped. Because now this wasn't just me defending my property anymore. This was about an HOA that had overstepped, while sitting on a much bigger compliance issue of their own. "So what happens now?" I asked. Another pause, but this one felt different. "Now," Daniel said, "we stop playing defense." He explained the next steps like he was outlining a blueprint, not rushed, not emotional, just precise. "We notify the State Waterway Authority. We provide documentation, the outdated survey, the current boundary data, the location of the marina structures. And then, we let them do what they're required to do. Investigate." I remember leaning back in my seat, looking out through the windshield, trying to picture how this was going to play out. Because up until that moment, this had been contained letters, one contractor, one dock. But once a state agency gets involved, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It affects everyone tied to that permit. Every boat slip, every shared structure, every resident who uses that marina. "You're sure about this?" I asked, not because I doubted the facts, but because I knew what it would mean. Daniel didn't hesitate. "They made a decision when they stepped onto your property," he said. "This is just the consequence of that decision." And that was it. No big speech, no dramatic buildup, just a quiet shift from reaction to action. We sent everything over that same day. Documentation, photos, survey comparisons, a full breakdown of the discrepancies. And then we waited. But this time, it felt different. Because now the clock wasn't just ticking for me. It was ticking for them. And about 3 weeks later, the first letter from the state showed up. And that's when things really started to unravel. The letter came in a plain envelope, nothing dramatic about it, no bold warnings on the outside, no sense that it carried any kind of weight. But the second I saw the return address, I knew exactly what it was, and more importantly, I knew it wasn't just for me. I opened mine standing right there by the mailbox, didn't even make it back inside. Just tore it open and read it once, then again slower. The State Waterway Authority had officially opened an investigation into the marina operations, citing potential boundary discrepancies tied to outdated survey data. It was written in that dry, clinical language they always use, but underneath it, the meaning was loud and clear. Something wasn't right, and they were going to dig into it. Later that afternoon, I saw the same envelope in a few of my neighbors' hands, people standing in their driveways, reading, comparing notes. You could feel it spreading through the neighborhood like a ripple. By the end of the week, it wasn't quiet anymore. Group chats lit up. HOA emails started flying around, emergency meetings being scheduled, people asking questions that, up until that point, nobody had thought to ask. What does this mean for the marina? Are we still allowed to use our slips? Who signed off on this permit? And for the first time since all of this started, the focus wasn't on me. It was on them. About 6 weeks after that first notice, the second letter came. This one didn't leave much room for interpretation. The marina permit, suspended, effective immediately, pending a full boundary review and structural reassessment. Every shared boat slip, locked down. Fuel dock, closed. No usage, no access. Not until everything was reevaluated and brought into compliance. Right in the middle of summer. And if you've ever lived in a lake community, you know what that means. That's not just an inconvenience. That's the season. That's why people live there in the first place. I remember standing out by the shoreline that evening, looking over toward the marina, and it was quiet. Eerily quiet. Boats just sitting there, tied up, untouched. A couple of neighbors walked down to the water, same as me. Nobody really said much at first, just kind of stood there taking it in. Then Carl, same guy who used to joke about my dock, shook his head and let out this low whistle. All this over a couple feet, Huh, he said. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, it was never about the 2 feet. It was about control. And now, that control had backfired in a way nobody in the HOA had anticipated. Word got around pretty quickly about how it all started, not from me. I kept my head down through most of it. But people talk, contractors talk, paperwork gets shared, and eventually the pieces connect. By the next week, there was another kind of conversation happening, quieter, more pointed. How did this get missed? Why were we using a survey from 1989? Who approved the enforcement action on private property? And then, just like that, Lauren was gone. No announcement, no explanation, just a short notice that she had stepped down from her position as head of the Architectural Review Committee. That was it. No apology, no follow-up, just gone. I saw her once after that, maybe a couple weeks later. She was loading something into her car, didn't look up when I walked by, and I didn't stop. There wasn't really anything left to say at that point. On my end, things moved a lot more quietly. The HOA's insurance carrier reached out. Not long after the suspension notice went public, and the tone there was very different from the letters I'd been getting before. Measured, careful, like they were suddenly very aware of how far things had gone. They covered everything. Full restoration of the dock, handled by a licensed marine contractor this time, proper permits, inspections, the whole process done exactly the way it should have been in the first place. They also covered the legal fees, every hour Daniel had put in, every filing, every consultation. And I'll give them this, the crew they brought in did solid work. When it was finished, the dock didn't just look like it used to. It looked better, stronger supports, cleaner lines. Even the finish on the wood had a smoother look to it. I stood out there the first evening after it was done, same spot where I'd stood weeks earlier looking at it half collapsed, and it felt different. Not just because it was fixed, but because of everything that had led up to it. You know, there's this idea people have about situations like is that it's about winning, about getting even, proving a point. And I guess in some ways, yeah, things worked out in my favor. But if I'm being honest, that's not really what stuck with me. What stuck with me was how quickly things escalated, how a single decision, made without checking the facts, without respecting boundaries, turned into something that affected an entire community. All because someone thought they had more authority than they actually did. And maybe that's the part that still sits with me. Because if she had just looked at the documents, if she had taken 5 minutes to verify instead of assuming, none of it would have happened. No damage, no legal fight, no investigation, no shutdown. Just a dock, sitting where it had always been. So yeah, in the end, everything got repaired, costs were covered, life went back to normal, at least on the surface. But every time I walk out there now, I see it a little differently. Not just as a place to sit and watch the water, but as a reminder that lines, whether they're on paper or in real life, matter. And crossing them, especially when you think you can get away with it, tends to come with consequences you don't see coming. Now I'm curious, if you came home and saw someone cutting into your property like that, no warning, no permission, just acting like they had the right, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have handled it the same way, kept it calm, gone the legal route? Or would you have confronted it right there, face to face? I've heard a lot of different answers since this all happened, and honestly, I get both sides. So tell me, where do you land on that?